Hello, friends. This is Michael Haspel. Our numbering woes continue, and will continue for a couple of more episodes. But essentially, whenever I say episode 2 in this, I really mean episode 4. This is QFD episode 4, season 1. All right, let's do this. 5, 4, 3. Hands on keys, turn. When we left off in episode 1, we were talking about how Conan's father was telling him about the theology of Crom and showing him the sword he had just forged. And he says, no one in this world can you trust. Not men, not women, not beasts. This you can trust. And he shows him the sword. Now, immediately after that, we get a blast of brass horns, almost like they're heralding something. A bunch of horns. The scene changes to this idyllic village scene, and we get kind of a Peter and the Wolf moment if you're just listening to the soundtrack, because if you guys aren't familiar with the Peter and the Wolf performance, an orchestra will play the story of Peter and the Wolf, and the strings represent Peter, and like the oboe is a duck, and different instruments represent different things. And for Conan, he's represented by woodwinds, and he's kind of out ice fishing, and then there are these brass horns just crashing through and everything, and these raiders are coming towards his village, and the song is called "The Riddle of Steel," Riders of Doom. So they are the Riders of Doom. They come crashing in and riding down, and you get some really incredible imagery out of this. The first thing Conan sees is, because he's away from the village, he sees kind of a Pictish scout, because Milius just looted from all over history. So there is like Norse mythology mixed in here. At one point later in the film, Conan talks about if he doesn't know the riddle of steel, he will be cast out of Valhalla, right? And Crom will laugh at him. So there's Norse mythology mixed in with Celtic mythology, with kind of Asian Oriental motifs. And here comes Franco Columbo, who is another bodybuilder, running up, and he stands up on this rock, and he's covered in tattoos, and there's steam rising off of his body. And it's amazing when you see it. He's just standing there, and Conan's kind of transfixed by watching this guy. And I'm going to take a quick segue to just talk about some funny stories here. The snow in that scene is fake, because it didn't snow, but it still was very cold. So the blood that they would get, had two sources for the blood. They either got it from a slaughterhouse, and or they had kind of fake blood when actors had to like put it in their mouths to spit up the blood or whatever. But the blood was freezing. The artificial blood, which was probably corn syrup based, so it was probably getting really thick and freezing. So they mixed it with vodka. And then you get all these really big bodybuilder types who are kind of drinking the fake blood instead of like spitting it out and stuff. So, and they're swinging swords around and riding horses, and so everything's cool. Don't worry about it. That's just the way the movie was made. There's a lot of insanity. There's no way they would have made the movie the way they did today, even in Spain. There's like a bajillion violations of safety that go on. It's just absolutely crazy. And to jump back at this, so this Pictish scout comes up, and there's kind of sunbeams coming down through the trees, and as he stands coordinated, cavalry comes around this rock, and they've got war dogs with them and everything, and they come out from both sides of this rock, and it's a brilliant, brilliant scene, and they attack and sack this village. And without getting into really too much detail, Conan's people, with a crash of cymbals, are massacred. You know, there's just massive amounts of carnage. But what he does is, interspersed with this, Conan's father tries to keep Conan's mother back, and she shrugs him off and then runs to go find her son. And interspersed with these scenes of carnage are scenes of Conan and his mother trying to make it through this battle to one another. And Conan's father winds up getting killed. And the opening raid sequence sets the tone for the whole film. It has no dialogue. You hear one shouted order, and it's something like, kill that one, you know, but it's not important. And that's one of the cool things about Conan the Barbarian. I'll take another segue to talk about a feature of modern films. So modern films right now, especially blockbusters, they have to play to the widest audience that they can. And so they've become all about spectacle. You can't have a whole lot of exposition describing plot and stuff when all that stuff has now to be subtitled. And a lot of foreign audiences are not going to read the subtitles. They're not going to bother with it, you know. They're just going to pay attention to, pay attention to the film, so they want spectacle. So the more visual a film can be, the better it tends to do overseas. So we get a lot of stuff nowadays where instead of taking a moment to describe something, filmmakers will throw in kind of a random action scene that may not have anything to do, and it may not have any consequences. You know, a perfect example of that is 2009 Star Trek, when Kirk gets sent down to the planet. Spock kind of banishes him to the planet, to the ice planet, and he's climbing out and everything and reflecting. You can see Vulcan being destroyed in orbit, and instead of him kind of taking a moment to get his bearings or whatever, he's attacked by these ice monsters that just come out of nowhere, and they really have no impact in the scene. They don't do anything in the movie. They're there to have Kirk run away from these ice monsters, and as soon as that is done and he meets up with old Spock, there's no more mention of the ice monsters. They're not worried about them. They don't show up again, nothing. And it's basically just there to keep the audience from getting bored, because as like an author or a filmmaker, the worst crime you can commit is to bore your audience. That's the worst thing you can do. So they throw in these things. Well, Conan goes, the entire film doesn't need any dialogue. You can follow the entire film as if it was a silent movie with just the soundtrack playing, the music playing, and you can follow it from point A all the way to the end, and it doesn't matter. And that doesn't make it an inferior film. I think that makes it better. Steven Soderbergh, who, I think he did all the Ocean's films, and he's a really good director. He actually did an experiment where he took Raiders of the Lost Ark, decolorized it, so put it up black and white, stripped the soundtrack out of it, and put in music that was just, basically a playlist of random music that had nothing to do with Raiders of the Lost Ark or anything to do with the images that are going on the screen. And he did that as an exercise so that people could watch this and understand how Spielberg told the entire story from beginning to end visually, and how he framed the film so that you would understand who the villains were, who the heroes were, entirely visually. And Conan the Barbarian does the exact same thing. It is pretty impressive. Milius had a couple films under his belt. I believe he had done Dirty Harry before Conan. So he definitely knew what he was doing. So jumping back in here, we get Conan and his mother running around, and women kind of get short shrift in a lot of these fantasy films. But here's our first example of like a female mother archetype that manifests itself. So the entire the entire village is destroyed. Everyone's dead. They're carrying, loot away and stuff. And Conan and his mother are standing there. And she's got kind of a, sword. She's ready to defend her son to the last. What's interesting about this scene, well, first of all, the score that comes on then is called, it's based on Dies Irae, which means Days of Wrath. And Thorgrim and Rexor, who are Thulsa Doom's kind of lieutenants, right? And Sven Ole Thorsen, who is a huge dude, plays him, and Ben Davidson, who's like an ex-NFL player, he plays Rexor, and Sven Ole Thorsen plays Thorgrim. And Thorgrim carries this, frankly, a comically sized hammer. I don't think if it was real, anybody'd be able to wield that thing. But it, pardon the pun, hammers home that if you get hit with that, you are dead. You're like not walking it off. You're done. But these two guys are serious murderers. We just saw them come down and carve up a village. And yet this woman is standing there with her son, and they don't do anything. They walk up. Thorgrim looks abashed, like almost ashamed. When he takes his helmet off, he looks at her, and the look on his face is almost like, hey, sorry we did this. Like it looks like he feels remorse. And it's just an interesting thing to see in this film and we're only about 10 minutes into the film right now. We're not that deep. But it's interesting to see. Rexor looks at her, and they bring Rexor Conan's father's sword, the one that we saw being forged at the beginning, right? And they hand it to Rexor. Rexor does not fight her with it. He salutes her. And we have to kind of drill down why did that happen, right? Well, first of all these guys had moms, right? So they relate that, hey, but a mother defending her child, that is an archetypal image that goes back way, way far, right? Kind of the mama bear image. And they're not going to tangle with that. They're not going to mess with that. For whatever superstitions they hold or whatever, they're not willing to go that far. They know that image, that symbol, that archetype is so powerful that something equally powerful has to take it out. And then up comes Thulsa Doom. And we first get a glimpse of him, and he comes down, he's covered in this ornate snake-themed armor, and comes down, and it's James Earl Jones, and Milius, he's wearing blue contact lenses and has straight black hair. And Milius's idea for that was that Thulsa Doom was kind of the last of a dying race. Like his race had all died off, and he was the last guy who looked like that, and he was kind of doing his own thing. And that's kind of what they wanted to go with that. And it's pretty interesting. And as a side note, real quick side note, Thulsa Doom is actually not from Conan the Barbarian. He's from a story that Robert E. Howard wrote beforehand about Kull the Conqueror, who was like an Atlantean king. And Atlantis comes back later in this whole deal. But Thulsa Doom comes up, and we get the first hint of his supernatural abilities. Because he comes up, he takes Conan's father's sword, looks at it, admires its craftsmanship, and then he locks eyes with Conan's mom. And there's a whole, thing going on there where snakes, especially in the pop culture of the time, snakes have this ability to hypnotize their prey. And we see it in like the Jungle Book with Kaa and Sir Hiss in the old Disney Robin Hood movie. And that's essentially what happens. Like, he doesn't beat her fair and square. He doesn't even fight her. He hypnotizes her, causes her to let down her guard, and then he chops off her head. And poor Conan is left there looking at his empty hand as his mother's hand is yanked out of it as her body falls. So it's really quite tragic. And as Mako comes in, now the narrator comes back in and he says, his was a tale of sorrow. And we see all these kids getting chained together, and they're sold to the Vanir and go off north, right? And he's sold to these guys that are running this thing that becomes known as the Wheel of Pain. And I don't even think they ever say that in the film. The name of it probably came from the soundtrack. That it is called like the Wheel of Pain, the song, right? And it's a really great moment. We see Arnold. Well, we don't see Arnold yet. We see young Conan and all these boys kind of pushing this wheel, and it's kind of a mill. It's implied it's some kind of a mill wheel, that it's grinding grain or something. But they're pushing this wheel, and we get a series of dissolves to show you time passing. You know, all these different weather conditions coming down, and as the dissolves go, there are fewer and fewer of the people pushing the wheel. And whether or not they're sold off or it's kind of, Milius says that it's natural selection, like picking the strongest of the wheel pushers. You know, the ones who can't cut it are dying off. So since he made the film, I have to go with his interpretation. But we get these series of reveals, and then there's this moment in the music and in the scene where we see that it's Arnold for the first time, and his back is so wide, it's taking up the entire image. It's really well shot and really uses Arnold's physicality perfectly. And as a fun fact, Arnold had to lose weight from his competition days as Mr. Universe to play Conan the Barbarian. So that's how big Arnold was at that time, is that he couldn't wield the sword properly. So he had to lose weight. Which is just bonkers if you think about it. Also, that's why there's a ton of really big bodybuilder types in this film, is because Arnold was so big, they couldn't get a stunt double for him. So he had to do his own stunts, which will come back to haunt him. And when they did some camera tests and everything where Arnold was fighting off kind of regular sized stuntmen, there was no sense of peril. It didn't look good. Arnold was just like essentially tossing these guys around. Nobody believed that he'd be in danger. So they reached out to Arnold and were like, hey, we need some big dudes. And Arnold's like, turns out I know a lot of big dudes. Hence why Sven Ole Thorsen and Ben Davidson and Franco Columbo and all these other guys make these appearances in the film. And it makes sense that, okay, well, those guys are just as big as Arnold. So, okay, you know, this is going to work out. So it's just kind of crazy, but we get to see all the physicality, or as that guy who does, I'm trying to think of his name now, the guy who does the reviews on, Hero Quest and stuff, he would say, look at the muscularity. And it's like, perfect example of that, as they showcase Arnold's muscularity off and everything. And he's the last guy pushing the wheel. And then all of a sudden he gets sold off to this red-haired bearded guy. And we don't know who he is. We have no idea what's going on. And neither does Arnold. And he gets brought to the side of this pit and he's sold off as a gladiator, we find out. He gets, they tell him to sit down and wait until it gets dark. And they throw him down into the pit. And this black guy comes out who's a gladiator, and he's got all of his teeth filed to these sharp points, and he's very intimidating dude, and he takes on Arnold, and Arnold kind of wins by just being bigger and stronger. He has no skill. He doesn't know what the heck he's doing, but they now give us this montage showing that Arnold is getting better at killing people. Like he has no remorse about it, and they give him all these weapons, and he gets all kinds of cool stuff. And so because he's this awesome gladiator now, Mako comes back and he says he was taken to the East, a great prize where the war masters would teach him, right? So they now show Conan, and he's being taught. He's somewhere in Asia, just based on the instructors and the other people that are taking care of him. And there is a funny aside here. Sensei Kiyoshi Yamasaki, who was the guy who taught him and Sandal Bergman and Jerry Lopez, who played Subutai, all their fight training, all their sword training. He's actually in the film. He is the sensei that is teaching Conan, and as another funny aside, when there's a guy kind of in the background, Conan does a sword move incorrectly, and the sensei steps in and slaps him, and there's this guy kind of in the background who's smiling and laughing that Arnold got hit. And Sensei Yamasaki turns around, spin kicks him like right in the stomach and drops the dude. Apparently that was not like, that wasn't like, it was choreographed in the sense that the guy knew he was going to do that, but he didn't pull his kick. He just kicked him and just dropped the guy. So it's just kind of funny that, and again, it just fits in with all the other stuff that went on this film. So, we also get told a couple of things in this sequence, right? And a lot of people think that Conan is this kind of brute, that he's not educated, that he's kind of stupid. And that's the perception that people get about Conan. That's kind of the pop image of Conan the Barbarian. He's this muscular brute, he's not intelligent, he's dumb. But we get to see him educated. He's sitting there, and Mako is narrating, and he says, he came to know the poetry of Kitai, the philosophy of Sung. And when he's doing that, he's reading a scroll. So he's literate at that point. And then he adds this other thing, when he also came to know the pleasures of women when he was bred to the finest stock. And it's that verb, bred, right? He's not a man. He's still an animal. He's still property. And unfortunately, so is the woman, So they're both property at this point. They're not a man yet. And then they tell him, but always there remained the discipline of steel. And they show him going through this whole kata in the dark by moonlight, and it looks really, really cool. And then we probably get the most famous scene in all of Conan the Barbarian. He's sitting with what in any other movie I would just call Mongols, because that's what they look like, right? And there's a reason for that. And they're sitting down and they're talking about they've just won a victory, And the general says, "Oh, that is good, but what is best in life?" Right? And one of his sons or something says, the open steppe, a fleet horse, falcons at your wrist. And he's like, "Wrong." And then Conan says the most famous line from the movie. Now, keep in mind, we're 24 minutes into the film, and Arnold has not said a line yet. And he says the big famous line, "Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentation of their women." And that is almost verbatim from Genghis Khan. And that's why I said they were Mongols, right? Timeline-wise, they wouldn't have been Mongols. But the actual quote is, and this comes from a book called The Emperor of All Men that was published in 1927. And it's just too close to, I'm positive this is where they got that scene from. It's, "The open steppe, a clear day, and a swift horse under you," responded the officer after a little thought, "and a falcon on your wrist to start up hares." "Nay," responded Khan. "Crush your enemies, see them fall at your feet, to take their horses and goods, and hear the lamentation of their women. That is best." So we get this Genghis Khan kind of quote in there, which is not the only tie to Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan's lead general was named Subutai, who we're about to meet in a little bit. So, but yeah, I just think it's kind of interesting that it's, 24 minutes into the film, we get the first kind of talk about it. So then the redheaded guy comes. We don't know his motivation. We don't know why he's doing this. We don't know what's going on. But he comes and he lets Conan free. So Conan goes off and starts to, he just basically gets chased out of the camp. And they're like, okay, so his first moments of freedom, and we hear Mako say, freedom, so far an unremembered dream, was his. And then we see him, and he's being chased by a pack of wild dogs. Like, that's his first experience with freedom is, hey, he's being chased by these dogs. Now, remember when he said that Arnold had to do all his own stunts? Well, he was really being chased by these dogs. And the dogs were not very well trained. So they're chasing prey in their mind, and they caught up to Arnold. Like on day one of filming, he gets taken out by this dog. And there is footage of that happening. But he had to get stitches and all kinds of stuff and was bitten by a dog pretty severely and everything. So Conan then goes into this barrow to there's kind of a tomb barrow that he goes up there to kind of hide from these wild dogs, and falls in there. He falls down the stairs and kind of cracks his head. And it's kind of funny because Arnold makes these weird noises in all these movies that he's in when he gets hurt. And it's kind of funny, but Arnold really did get hurt. He's tumbling down the stairs, and he gashed his head open. It's just like, wow, really? Okay. So he gashes his head open, and he's bleeding, right? And he turns to Milius, and he's like, hey, I'm hurt. I'm bleeding. And Milius goes, no, it's great. Don't wipe it off. It looks fantastic, right? And Arnold's like, but I'm bleeding. And Milius says, pain is temporary. Film is forever. And I think that sets the tone for how Milius was making this movie. He was just like, well, whatever. You're going to heal. We'll get you to doc. But that scene looked awesome. And we're going to go for awesome before safe or before anything else. So Arnold sits there and Conan sits there and he's in this crypt. He makes a little fire, starts up and everything. And he sees kind of a figure, a king figure sitting on a throne. It's a skeletal figure at this point, holding a sword. And this scene comes from a story by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter called The Thing in the Crypt. And that's how we know the sword is Atlantean. If you're in the prop collecting community, replica props and everything like that, that sword that Conan carries throughout the entire film is called the Atlantean sword. And that's why. Is because it comes out of the story that this tomb is actually an Atlantean tomb that he has discovered. And he takes the sword, and in the film, by him taking the sword, he's kind of disturbed the skeleton, and it kind of just crumples in on itself and falls. And that's the first time we hear Conan pray to his god. And all he says is, Crom. I'm kind of in awe. In the story, The Thing in the Crypt, which is actually kind of cool, the king is not so forgiving about somebody taking his sword. So Conan has to deal with the undead. It's kind of fun. So he climbs up out of the crypt, and he's got, he's got this look on his face. Like now he has a sword. He's not running anymore. And you hear these dogs, these wild dogs. And they might supposed to be wolves, but I think they were dogs. But you hear these dogs like barking in the distance, like they were waiting for him the whole time. But instead of being frightened, he just looks at them and brings up the sword. The next time we see Conan, he's not naked or wearing a loincloth anymore. He's actually got some nice furs all around him made out of dog or wolf pelts. So it's just kind of funny. He moves on and he runs into this woman that when I originally saw them film, it didn't, I was just kind of like, whatever, this is kind of boring. But she's a witch or some kind of demon, and she's commonly referred to as the witch, but I think she's actually like a succubus. And there is a really, really creepy way about the way she talks. Like, the way she speaks, and I don't know if it's because the actress is being overdubbed by somebody else or something, but the way she speaks is just really, really creepy. Like if you were playing D&D and the DM was like, oh, you see this woman, very alluring, and she's like, hey, don't you want to come and warm yourself by my fire? And the way she says that, you're just like, no, I'm good. Like, I'm just going to keep going this way. You're a side quest I don't need to deal with right now, right? But Conan's just like, hey, whatever, cool. There's food and a fire, and it's cold. So he goes in, and she starts to tell this prophecy that she knows. She's like, they said you would come from the north, a great man, a man who would one day be king by his own hand, right? And then she starts talking about snakes. And Conan starts looking for a standard, that Thulsa Doom had carried, and it's the only thing he can really remember from his childhood as far as like who perpetrated this. He remembers the standard they were carrying, which was 2 snakes over a black sun with a black moon. And she tells him, you need to go to Zamora, But before she tells him that, she says there's a price. Well, the price is he has to have sex with her. And that's why I think she's more of a succubus, because after she tells him he needs to go to Zamora, she starts to change into some kind of creature, demon, something. We see her teeth grow. We see her hair get all crazy. She's strong enough to kind of hold him to her as she's transforming. He throws her into the fire. She turns into a fireball and just appears uninjured. In fact, she leaves and she's laughing as she's leaving as this fireball. So she was just kind of messing with him or testing him or something. And as he steps out, he hears a voice. And now we run into the sidekick character, which is Subutai, who shares a name with the Mongolian general. And he's played by Jerry Lopez, who is a Hawaiian like surfer god. Interestingly enough, that is not his actual voice that we hear in the film. He was dubbed by a Japanese actor, and his name eludes me right now, and I can't really find it in my notes. But he was uncredited, unfortunately. But he wound up doing the voice for Subutai throughout the entire movie. So that's not Jerry Lopez's voice. But, we get this whole thing, and these guys kind of meet through mutual nihilism almost. Because Conan goes over and he says, and Subutai's asking for food. And he's like, food, give me food so I can have strength when the wolves come. And I have not eaten for days. And Conan goes, and who says you will? And they both kind of laugh at that. And then when Subutai kind of identifies himself, and he has this whole pedigree, of where he came from. He's Hyrcanian, the Order of Carlet, and all this stuff. And Arnold's unimpressed. He's just like, well, what are you doing here? And Subutai is like, well, I'm dinner for Wolf. And they both have a laugh, and the next thing you know, they're off running. And we get a discussion about theology that comes in here. And this scene itself is what crystallized in my head that Conan is a spaghetti Western. It's a spaghetti fantasy film, because this conversation they have is very similar to conversations Angel Eyes would have with Tuco in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, a bunch of different stuff like that. But they have this conversation, and Conan explains that, Crom doesn't answer his prayers or anything, and Subutai explains that because he prays to the four winds are stronger than Crom because Crom lives underneath them, because his is the everlasting sky. We get this nice montage of them exploring civilization, exploring the world, just seeing different things. And they get this scene where they actually find they're going around looking for the snakes, looking for the standard. And we get this scene where they go up against this guy, this kind of merchant, and it's night, and they ask him about the standard, 2 snakes coming together, and he knows what they're talking about. But he kind of doesn't. He's like, oh, the only snakes I know about are those in the towers of Set. And they murder people in the night. I don't know anything. And then he hands them off, this thing called Black Lotus, which is a drug. It's kind of a leaf that they chew. And that guy is Ron Cobb, who was like the production designer on the film. He was not an actor. It was kind of a cameo. And John Milius also had a scene like that where he was like selling meat on a stick, but that scene and that footage of that scene exists, and it's really bad. And Milius had the wherewithal to cut it from the film because it's really bad and super campy. We do see the end of that scene where Arnold is kind of eating this lizard that's on a stick, and he tells Subutai it's good. And then Subutai's like, well, you don't know how long it's been there, right? And they're experiencing all these different things with civilization. And when they now find out that there's this Tower of Set, they're going to go check it out and rob it. because they say, oh, there's full of jewels. It's all this stuff. All this stuff is in there. So they're going to go steal stuff from the tower, try to find out more about it and everything like that. So we're going to wrap it up there. And there is a reason for that, is in modern storytelling, everything I've just told you, everything I just talked about would have been a prologue and would have been cut, because that's not where the story begins. The story begins when they enter the garden to go climb the Tower of Set to rob it. And we'll talk about that in the next episode. So until next time, keep it clean and green. And I'm Mike, out. You have been listening to Quantum Froth Dispatches by Michael Haspel. Music and other cues are provided by The Fat Rat. The song you're hearing is Monody, featuring Laura Brem. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit www.patreon.com/QFD. Thank you for listening, and we now return you to your mundane reality.